He didn't disappear after that. That's the part that matters. The next day he texted like usual. Not dramatic. Not defensive. Just a question about whether the groceries I'd bought were the brand I actually liked or the one I settled for when the store was out. I answered. We joked. It slid right back into place like nothing had shifted. When he came over that evening, he brought takeout from the Thai place I never ordered from because parking there was a nightmare. He remembered my order exactly. Extra lime. No peanuts. I noticed that more than I noticed the way he hugged me a second longer than usual, like he was anchoring something. I mentioned the alarm code casually like an afterthought. I said it hadn't worked for a second and then it did. He didn't react right away. He chewed, swallowed, nodded. He said the system sometimes lagged after updates. He said that was why he'd merged the access points. Fewer variables. Less room for error. It sounded reasonable. It always did. We didn't have a talk. We rarely did. Things with him were handled the way adults handle furniture that's already in the room. You move around it. You don't announce it. He started staying over more consistently after that. Not every night. Enough that it felt intentional. He'd wake up early, make coffee, leave my mug where I'd find it and go for a run. Sometimes he was still there when I came back from my shower. Sometimes he wasn't. Both felt normal. There was a night when I woke up and realized he wasn't in bed. I found him in the living room, sitting on the floor with his back against the couch, laptop open, cameras up on the screen. He said one of the sensors had glitched and he wanted to make sure it wasn't a pattern. He said he didn't want to wake me. I told him he didn't have to do that. He said he wanted to. That was the tone of everything. Wanting to. Choosing to. Never taking, always offering. I let him fold himself deeper into my routines. He picked up my dry cleaning. He handled a missed delivery while I was on a call. He started answering the door without looking at me first, like it was already understood. Once, when I was out of town, he sent me screenshots of the house at night. Lights off. Doors locked. Everything still. He didn't caption them with anything dramatic. Just all good here. I slept better because of it. I really did. There were moments that didn't quite land, but they were small. A notification cleared before I saw it. A log entry summarized instead of detailed. When I asked, he explained in the same calm voice every time. He said too much information made people anxious. He said trust was about filtering noise. That sounded smart. I'd said similar things myself, just in other contexts. One evening, we sat on the kitchen floor eating ice cream straight from the container. He leaned back against the cabinet, head tilted, watching me talk about something stupid from work. He reached out and brushed a smear of chocolate from my thumb with his mouth like it was nothing, like we'd been doing that forever. That night, I gave him full administrative access. Not ceremonially. I didn't say, "This is important." I just slid my phone across the table when he asked if he could streamline a few things. He showed me what he was doing as he did it. I watched the toggles switch. I watched my name stay there. Felt like alignment. Like relief. Later, lying in bed, he wrapped his arm around me and said he liked that I trusted him. He didn't say it like a test. He said it like a fact he was grateful for. I believed him because nothing about him felt rushed. The next morning, when I left for work, the door locked behind me with a sound I didn't recognize. I noticed it. I didn't stop. After that, things didn't speed up. They narrowed. He became more present in the house and less present everywhere else. Fewer messages during the day, but when he was with me, he was there. Phone face down. Attention steady. He listened the way people do when they're already holding the thread of what you're about to say. He started phrasing things as assumptions. Not demands. Not decisions. Just quiet statements that slid into place. He'd say, "I already handled that," about small things. A service call. A missed delivery. An alert I hadn't seen. It was always framed as saving me effort, protecting my focus. And it worked. I let go of noticing. There was a night when the power flickered during a storm. Nothing dramatic. Just a brief outage. He was already moving before I got out of bed. Checking panels, pulling up camera feeds on his phone. He said it was probably nothing, but he wanted to be sure. I stood in the hallway watching him work like this was his house too. That was the first time I felt something like relief instead of affection. A few days later, I tried to adjust one of the cameras myself. Just curiosity. I wanted to see how the backyard looked at night. The app asked for confirmation I didn't recognize. Secondary approval. I assumed I'd forgotten a step. I closed it and moved on. When I mentioned it later, he smiled and said he'd added a safeguard. He said it was for my benefit. He said if someone ever compromised my phone, they wouldn't be able to change anything critical. He said redundancy was a kindness people didn't appreciate until it mattered. I remember nodding. I remember thinking it sounded like something I'd say at work. We didn't argue. We never argued. There was no tension to push against. Just a gentle slope where decisions seemed to roll in one direction without friction. He stopped asking before inviting himself to stay over. He just stayed. He left early sometimes, but his presence lingered. His toothbrush. His shoes by the door. The way the house smelled faintly like him even when he wasn't there. Once I asked him if he ever felt like it was too much. Being responsible for someone else's safety. He laughed softly and said he liked being useful. He said it gave him purpose. He said not everyone knew how to take care of things properly. That line stuck with me later. At the time it felt like competence. There were moments, though. Small ones. A sensor alert summarized instead of listed. A camera feed labeled offline that came back on before I could ask. Once I came home and the house was already disarmed, even though I hadn't done it remotely. He said he'd been there earlier to grab a jacket and hadn't wanted the alarm blaring. I told him to keep a key instead. He said keys were less secure. He said systems were better. I didn't push. The night he asked me to authorize the final changes, it was almost casual. We were brushing our teeth, mirror fog, talking about nothing important. He said the company had updated their back end. He said some permissions needed to be consolidated to avoid glitches. He said my name would still be there, of course. He said it was mostly technical. He handed me his phone because mine was charging. Everything looked familiar enough. My address. My system. My profile photo. I approved it because it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like maintenance. After that, he slept deeply. For the first time, I noticed that. No waking at small noises. No checking the windows. He rested like someone who knew things were handled. I lay awake longer than usual, listening to the house do what it always did. Settle. Breathe. Hold. The next day, my app interface looked cleaner. Fewer options. Fewer notifications. It was quieter. I told myself that was the point. It started to feel like the house wasn't asking me questions anymore. I'd come home and things would already be set the way they needed to be. Alarm disarmed. Lights adjusted. The thermostat shifted a degree without me touching it. None of it was wrong. That was the problem. There was nothing to push against. I tried once. Just to see. I stood in the hallway and said his name out loud, half joking, like I was testing whether he'd hear me from another room. He wasn't there. The house stayed quiet. No response. No sound. Just the low hum of something running in the walls. That night, he came over later than usual. No apology. No explanation. He kissed me, asked if I'd eaten, put his phone face down on the counter like always. I told him I tried to change a setting and couldn't. I kept my tone light. He didn't tense. He didn't get defensive. He said the company had rolled out another update. He said too many people were locking themselves out by accident. He said they were trying to protect users from themselves. He smiled when he said it. I remember noticing that smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Or maybe it did, and I just didn't like what I saw there anymore. I asked him to walk me through it. Not confrontational. Just practical. He said he would. Not right now. Later. He said he was tired. We went to bed anyway. He wrapped his arm around me, familiar, warm. At some point in the night, I woke up and realized his arm was gone. I lay there listening. No footsteps. No doors. Nothing. In the morning, he was already up, dressed, coffee made. He kissed my forehead and said he had an early appointment. He said he'd call. He didn't. That afternoon, I got a notification from the security company. Not an alert. A message. Polite. Neutral. It thanked me for confirming recent changes and attached a summary for my records. I didn't open it right away. I waited until I got home. I sat at the kitchen table. I read it slowly. Primary account holder. Updated. Secondary access. Modified. Administrative permissions. Consolidated. My name was still there. Just not where it had been before. I texted him a screenshot. No commentary. Just the image. He replied an hour later. He said he'd explain. He said it looked worse than it was. He said I shouldn't worry. That phrase landed wrong. Shouldn't. When he finally came over that night, he acted like we were picking up a conversation we'd paused, not one we were having for the first time. He took off his shoes. He poured himself water. He leaned against the counter like he belonged there more solidly than I did. I asked him very plainly if I could still change the codes. He hesitated. Just a fraction. Enough. He said it wasn't a good idea right now. He said consistency mattered. He said too many hands created risk. He said he was doing this for us. I asked him to show me. He said tomorrow. That was the first time he assumed tomorrow without checking if I agreed it existed. We slept in the same bed, backs turned this time. In the morning, he was gone again. This time, he'd taken his things. Not all of them. Just enough. When I left for work, the door locked behind me with that same unfamiliar sound. At lunch, I tried to re-enter the system from my phone. The app loaded, then stalled. A message appeared asking me to contact the primary administrator for access changes. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. I didn't call him. That evening when I came home, the house greeted me like it always had. Calm. Secure. Perfectly managed. It just didn't feel like mine anymore. I didn't confront him right away. Not because I was scared. Because I was still inside the version of us where things got resolved quietly without scenes. I kept waiting for the moment where he'd notice my distance and step back on his own. It didn't happen. Instead, he sent a message that night asking if I'd eaten. Just that. No mention of the app. No mention of the question I'd asked. I answered yes. I didn't add anything. He came over the next evening like he still had a key. Because he did. I heard the door unlock while I was in the shower. The sound cut through the water in a way that made my chest go tight. When I walked into the bedroom, he was there, sitting on the edge of the bed, scrolling his phone like nothing had shifted. He looked up and smiled. "Hey," he said like it was a normal Thursday. I told him we needed to talk. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just said it plainly, the way you say something that should already be obvious. He listened. He always listened. He let me finish before responding. Nodded in the right places, didn't interrupt. When I was done, he said he understood why I felt unsettled. He said control issues were triggering for people who were used to managing everything themselves. That was the first time he used my competence as a reason I was overreacting. He said he'd taken on more responsibility because he saw how much I carried. He said I should feel supported, not threatened. He said this wasn't about ownership. It was about trust. I asked him again if I could change the codes. He didn't say no. He said, "Why do you need to?" The question hung there. Not aggressive. Curious. Reasonable. Like I was the one deviating from something sensible. I told him I needed to know I could. He looked at me for a long second, then sighed softly, like I was asking for reassurance that had already been given too many times. He said changing things back and forth created instability. He said security systems weren't emotional. He said consistency mattered more than feelings. Then he added very calmly that if I didn't trust him, that was a bigger issue than any app setting. I remember standing there thinking how carefully he built that sentence. How it turned my question into a flaw. That night he stayed. He slept deeply again, arm heavy across my waist. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, counting the small noises of the house and realizing I didn't know which ones were natural anymore. In the morning, I tried something small. I disconnected the Wi-Fi. Just to see. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. A message from him already at work, asking if my internet was down. He said the cameras had gone offline and he wanted to make sure I was okay. I didn't reply. I turned the router back on. The system reconnected automatically. The alert cleared before I could even open it. Later that day, I called the security company directly. Not emotional. Not dramatic. I said I needed help restoring my original permissions. The representative was polite. Professional. She asked for verification. I gave it. She paused, then said the account structure didn't allow changes from my level anymore. She said the primary administrator would need to authorize it. She offered to send a request. I asked who the primary administrator was. She said his name. Hearing it out loud, attached to something that controlled my house, felt different than seeing it on a screen. That evening, when he texted asking what I wanted for dinner, I didn't answer. I sat on the couch in the dark instead, phone in my hand, listening to the house hum around me, secure and efficient and no longer responsive to me at all. For the first time since I'd known him, I didn't feel protected. I felt managed. I changed the locks the next morning. Not the digital ones. The physical ones. I did it early before work, before he could text, before I could second-guess myself. The locksmith didn't ask why. He never does. He drilled, replaced, tested, handed me new keys. When he left, the house felt briefly unmoored, like it didn't recognize itself yet. The alarm still worked. The camera still watched. That part hadn't changed. When I tried to arm the system from inside, the app asked for confirmation from the primary administrator. I didn't push it again. He noticed the locks by noon. He didn't call. He sent a message first. Calm. Controlled. He said changing the locks without coordinating was risky. He said it broke continuity. He said I was escalating something that didn't need escalation. I didn't answer. An hour later, another message. Softer this time. He said he was coming over so we could talk face to face like adults. I replied once. I said no. He came anyway. I watched him on the camera feed from my office upstairs. He stood on the porch longer than necessary, phone in hand, looking at the door like it had betrayed him. He knocked once. Then again. Then he stopped. My phone buzzed. He said I was making a mistake. He said systems weren't emotional, but people were, and I was letting feelings override logic. He said everything he'd done had been for stability, for safety, for us. I didn't respond. I watched him step back into the frame, pull something from his pocket, then stop. He looked up at the camera, not angrily, thoughtfully, like he was deciding what version of himself to leave me with. Then he turned and walked away. That night, I slept with the house lit. Not every light, just enough. The alarm stayed disarmed. I didn't want to hear it talk back to me. In the morning, the system was offline. Not broken. Disabled. The app loaded to a blank screen with a short message saying the account was under administrative review. No buttons. No settings. Just a phone number. When I called, the woman on the line was careful. She said the primary administrator had requested a suspension due to a security dispute. She said it was temporary. She said access would be restored once ownership was clarified. I asked her whose ownership. She paused before answering. I didn't cry after that call. I sat very still. I noticed small things. The hum of the refrigerator. The way the floor creaked near the stairs. Sounds I hadn't listened to in months because something else had been listening for me. Later that afternoon, a courier arrived. No return address. Just my name. Inside was a slim folder. Printed screenshots. Logs. Access histories. Notes he'd written to himself. Not about stealing. About transition. About handover. About how long it took before people stopped checking things they trusted. At the bottom was a short note, handwritten. He said he'd hoped I'd be grateful. He said most women were. He said resistance changed things. He said if I pushed this further, the system would side with whoever appeared more consistent. I folded the note and put it back in the folder. That evening, the power cut out for exactly 30 seconds. When it came back on, the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been before. No cameras clicking, no system reconnecting, just silence. I realized then what he'd taken. Not the house, not the access, the idea that I was safer because someone else was watching. That night, I locked the door with the new key and left the phone downstairs. I slept lightly. I woke up to every sound. In the morning, the sun came through the windows the way it always had. The house stood there, unmonitored, imperfect, mine. There were no new messages. The system stayed offline. And for the first time since I'd met him, nothing was managing me anymore.